Rachel Duchamp. Welcome to Free Exchange, hosted by the Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise at Lindenwood University. The Hammond Institute fosters free enterprise and civil and religious liberty through the examination of market-oriented approaches to economic and social issues. I'm here today with my guest, David Rosenwasser. He is director of the Duree Center for Entrepreneurship, which is a center within the Hammond Institute. And we also have Howard Wall, the director of the Hammond Institute, and also the director of the Center for Economics and the Environment. All of which are parts of the Institute. I am the director of the Liberty and Ethics Center as well. So we're going to focus on you, David, as director of the Duree Center, and you have quite a storied history. Could you tell us a little bit about your background in marketing?
It sounds like I've been indicted more than once or twice by that introduction. I have a somewhat eclectic and varied background. I earned my living for a long time putting rear ends in seats. I did marketing for events. Some were theatrical, some were sport-oriented. I also have a career in the tourism industry, but most of the time I worked in disciplines like marketing, advertising, promotion, public relations, sales, things of that sort, on behalf of sport entities or attractions, destinations, or entertainment, predominantly family entertainment.
And you did meet some famous people in those years, right?
So, and they got to meet me.
You've got to
more importantly,
more to the point.
Yes.
So can you pick out one story for us?
Well,
to share?
For my generation, I would say probably meeting Elvis Presley.
Incredible.
It really was quite the experience. The background was Colonel Parker, who managed Elvis from the very beginning to his death, was an old carnival guy, and he knew a lot of people in the circus, and I worked for Ringling Brothers for about 15 years, and once introduced to Colonel Parker, he asked me if I would like to bring a gentleman named Gunther Gable-Williams, who was the most renowned animal trainer, I would say, in North America and in Europe in the 70s and 80s. If Gunther would like to see Elvis perform, and he could make the arrangements, and we'd all be guests of Elvis at the Hilton Hotel, what they used to call the old International Hilton. And so through some friendships I had, called in a few favors, and Gunther Gable-Williams and his wife Sigrid and I flew to Las Vegas and were guests of Elvis, and we sat in a banquet with Colonel Parker and the three of us and another gentleman named Bob Dover, who was a very close friend of Colonel Parker's. And after the show, Colonel Parker turned to me and he said, "Elvis would really like to meet Gunther. Would you like to go backstage with us?" And I said, "Oh, I'd love to. It'd be a real treat." And so we went into a dressing room that was kind of set up like a bedroom, and we were there just a minute, and all of a sudden Elvis came in, and he had in his hand all of these kind of scarves that he used to throw out to the audience were emblazoned with his signature. Well, he didn't have one or two. His fist was clenched, but he went over to Sigrid Gable and he said, "Can I give you some of these?" And there were like 20 of them or something. It was awkward. But he said something that was very interesting. He said to Gunther, "I'd love to see you perform." Here's probably the most famous entertainer of his time saying to a circus performer he'd like to see him. He said, "I just can't figure out how to come into an arena when you play and not be a distraction to what's going on." And Gunther was so impressed by that. And Elvis stayed for about 15 minutes, talked to him, asked him all kinds of questions about his performing and his background, et cetera, turned to each of the other, turned to myself and to Bob Dover and asked what we did. He was very, very sociable, et cetera, and then he said, "You know, we always have a party after the opening night," because it was the opening night of that time frame that he performed, and invited us to go, and we declined, thought maybe a little bit of awkward situation for us. But, you know, when I tell people that I met Elvis and under the circumstances, they think I made it up, but it's true. It's true.
That's wonderful.
And Gunther Gable-Williams.
And Gunther. Well, Gunther was a friend. Gunther was a very dear friend, and was a real showman. He could have been anything in show business. He just knew how to please audiences.
Now, after working with situations such large audiences, Now, at the Duree Center for Entrepreneurship, you're actually interested in going small. Is that right? Small business.
Yes, we are. We think that there's a real niche in our community and in this region as well to serve, and that trying to facilitate people who have an entrepreneurial spirit but may not have a network to plug into or the resources or the knowledge of how to get started. We're trying to develop programming that would offer opportunities from people of all walks of life, and quite frankly, based on the economy in this country and almost worldwide. One of the great things about entrepreneurship is you're not dependent upon somebody else providing you an opportunity to apply for a job. You create your own job. And the vast majority of what happens any place is really driven by small businesses. So we think there are appropriate niches for some of the other academic institutions in metropolitan St. Louis, St. Charles, that they've been picked up. But the small business situation is still wanting somebody to identify and to take it on. And we think it's a great fit for the Duree Center. And that, quite frankly, Lindenwood as a university has some audiences internally as well as external audiences here throughout St. Charles County and adjacent counties. So we think that we can bring resources to the table that can not only encourage people, but really can give them the tools to be successful. And there are a number of parallel paths that we're developing to do that.
Yeah, something that's really struck me as an advisor to students is how much the direction that a student takes and the way that they get into the marketplace is influenced by their family background, who they know, networking, the way that they've been raised in terms of how they go about approaching these things. And so if you don't have that sort of a background, if you didn't come from a family of business people or a family of entrepreneurs, you may have the right sort of energy, you may have the right sort of skills, but you don't necessarily have the entree. And so it seems to me that that's what you're trying to provide.
Absolutely. That's a perfect description, Rachel. As an example, Lindenwood has a very significant portion of its student body being first generation university or college students.
Yeah.
Many of those people have the same hurdle to a certain degree in their future for employment, which is they come from families that no one before them has had the opportunity to go to college, graduate, et cetera, et cetera. So their networks are very limited, if existing at all. In many cases, they just don't have experience or what I call table talk over their life about what it's like to initiate taking on the entrepreneurial spirit and creating a business, growing that business, making it successful, and continuing to do that. So we feel that that segment of the student population is really a wonderful match for what we want to do. There's nobody who can't utilize the Duree Center, both from a student body standpoint, the community, the extended community, faculty, et cetera, et cetera. But we think it really serves that population. The other thing that we find is that we have a significant international student population here. And a number of those students come from families that have the business background, but these students are very enamored of what they find is the lifestyle and the culture here in the United States. And if they wanted to make that transition to become residents here, and whether it's through green card or whatever immigration policy, one of the nice things is that in those cases, some of these people actually have the financial resources for funding, but again, we can now provide programming, academic courses, et cetera, to complement that and introduce them and graduate them and then provide resources. One of our hopes is that we will have a stable, maybe not the perfect term, but to me it does sing, where we would have pro bono services volunteered through us for legal, for marketing, for operational, for financial, so that somebody that got to that point and had a more mature business and marketing plan, which we would help them with from the very beginning, when they needed those initial services, that we could help them, because most of them will probably be somewhat compromised by funding, that we would have a number of attorneys throughout the community and marketing people, et cetera, financial advisors, CPAs, to help them get started. And then at some point they'd have to graduate from that, either go existing on their own knowledge base, and then at the same time, for our students, it'll help direct them to course choices. because as they move through the process that the Duree Center can help them with, they can find out what they have to backfill. Gee, I need a course in whatever type of accounting that I didn't anticipate because I was a sport management major, but I've decided that there's a whole world out there to become an agent, but it's a business, it's an entrepreneurship kind of situation. So we want to be able to be that toolbox in many ways through programming and other resources that we aggregate and then kind of provide and manage for the balance both ways, that there's an equilibrium, that people don't abuse these free services, and at the same time, those who are willing to provide those pro bono services also know that what we're asking for has an ultimate goal that is very beneficial, which is to have these people be successful business people.
Now you have an upcoming symposium, and you have the symposium they're usually focused on some area.
Yes.
And this one is an interesting one.
Yes, we've decided that we're going to pick certain themes for each of the symposium. The first one that we held, or since I've been the director, was entrepreneurship in the arts, and we had 4 different speakers from different disciplines, things like intellectual property rights, funding, marketing, etc. And we had wonderful response. We actually were oversubscribed for the capacity of the theater that we used in Hammond Hall, Dunseth Auditorium. This next one, which will be Saturday, November 16th, we're kind of have a bifurcated situation. It will be entertainment and sport and entrepreneurship. And there are many fields where in each of those disciplines, you really are an entrepreneur. And whether it is someone who wants to be, let's say, an agent, and that's a very popular destination in the minds of young adults today. They see it as quite the cachet gets them a date on Friday night while they're a student when they say, I'm going to become a sports agent kind of thing. But more seriously, that there are opportunities for all of that. And quite frankly, they are now peers of some of those people who will become highly desirable sport talent, et cetera, et cetera. And in entertainment, there are lots of opportunities for people to be part of the entertainment industry when they may not be the talent themselves. And whether it's as a producer or promoter or whatever those capacities. So we will have speakers that will have hands-on experience and great length of success as our presenters. We try to do 2 things. One, we want to have people who have done it from ground zero. They don't have a situation where they inherited a corporation, they're the 2nd or 3rd generation. So these are people who've had to climb all these mountains from the beginning. And the second thing is to allow our attendees to have adequate time for Q&A with these individuals, because in most cases the people in the audience would never have an opportunity to have access to these kinds of folks. So this is a great situation.
Thank you, David. We'll be right back in just a moment after this break. Welcome back to Free Exchange. I'm here with my guests, David Rosenwasser and Howard Wall, and I'm Rachel Duchamp. And we had just discussed a little bit some of the symposia that the Duree Center hosts. And you also have an arrangement with a local entity?
Yes, the Economic Development Center of St. Charles County is really kind of is a partner with us in the programming, and they've been very, very supportive, both financially as well as utilizing some of their resources and the network of people that are involved in Partners for Progress. So we have business leaders in the community aware of what we're doing and, quite frankly, providing us the kind of feedback that helps direct us to the most efficient use of what our limited resources are. So it's been a very nice arrangement. Greg Presteman, their executive director, has been a real supporter of the Duree Center, and we appreciate that greatly.
Yeah, there's so many elements to the entrepreneurial side of a lot of jobs, even if we wouldn't call someone an entrepreneur. For instance, the other day I was advising a student who wants to get a CFA and become a financial advisor. There's really an entrepreneurial aspect to building your client base and things like that. I was wondering if you and Howard could discuss the concept of entrepreneurship with our audience.
Well, you know, David, what's always struck me is you talked a lot about the kind of the practical aspects of being an entrepreneur, getting a lawyer, knowing how to do the accounts, and the part that always struck me as the most difficult part about being an entrepreneur is thinking that you might be one, or just even thinking of it as a possibility. I know my own background, I grew up in a state capital. Your goal was to work for the state or for the phone company.
Must be New York.
So it was New York. And
Everybody has to work for the state of New York.
and the entrepreneurial spirit, which is really just, starts with just the notion, well, maybe I'll start my own business, was just not present. And I actually notice it a lot more in St. Louis, but that might be because of where I'm from. So can you talk a little bit about how you're going to develop that in students?
Actually, you've given me a great opportunity to talk about something that we're in the early stages, but we recognize, and I couldn't agree with you more, Howard, that in mathematical terms, the locus from which these things would emanate has to be this kind of heart-mind alliance to even make the step. We've identified, with the help of Susan Mangels, the Vice President of Development for the university, suggesting there is a program that the Kauffman Foundation from Kansas City has been very generous to, and it's based on a book called Who Owns the Ice House? And we have begun the necessary steps to, one, be trained as a facilitator for that program. And it's really based on 8 characteristics, not kind of who the vendors need to be, but essentially the essence. What's the heart and soul of entrepreneurship? And we hope within the next 90 days to be certified to be able to offer that program here throughout the community. And our expectation is that we would have students who would access it, that we would have people from outside the community. We may even have employers who found that program, and they offer it in a number of ways. And one of the ways they offer it, which I think is appropriate for us, is what they call traditional, which is everything would be available here in the School of Business. And the reason I think it's important, because some of the at-risk audience that we'd like to have take advantage of this, they may not have a computer at home. They may not have the kinds of hardware and software necessary. So if we do it here at Harmon Hall in one of the computer labs in an off-hour situation, we know that the people that participate have everything they need to do it. It's a very modest price. My guess is we'll offer scholarships for individuals who have financial compromise, et cetera, et cetera. And we're hoping that people even like economic development, and perhaps even the city of St. Charles, I met with their economic development director and showed him this program, will join us, and we'll identify those people who want to be entrepreneurs, come to these organizations, but don't even have the sensibility yet to know what it takes to have the heart and soul of an entrepreneur, and that you'll have failures and you will have all kinds of things that are very taxing on you on a personal basis in the very beginning. And that how you do it. And the story of Who Owns the Ice House is a very simplistic one, but it's true. It's a book that was written by a gentleman about his uncle, who was an African-American gentleman in Mississippi who owned the only ice house in that region, and how he exemplified both to the white and the African-American community all of those characteristics and trait of a very well-respected, successful business person. And how did he distinguish himself? Because at that time, most of the African-American population, by the book's narration, tells you very clearly you expected to be a cotton-picking farmhand, et cetera. That's, you aspired because at least you'd have some baseline living. So somebody's kind of ahead of us, and one of the nice things, and quite honestly, at my age, I'd like to not have to go reinvent something that's been perfected, is this offers exactly that type of approach at the very earliest stages. And I think the other thing that will benefit is it will allow us to have people who hear it and think, you know, that's great, I think I'd love to do it, But when they see what you go through in this course and the topics that are touched upon, these 8 characteristics, they can also know very quickly, you know what, this really isn't for me. And to some degree, I think that's as important as the success stories that'll go forward, rather than people thinking, well, if I just say the words, it happens. That's not good enough.
Well, there's a lot of research showing that the best indicator of who's going to be an entrepreneur is someone whose parents were entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And a lot of it seems to be just the risk taking and just the expectation, well, I might fail and then I'll just start up again. And to a lot of people, it's just the fear of bankruptcy or something. And I know people who declared bankruptcy several times, and it's part of being an entrepreneur.
I have to tell you, I lived in the state of Texas, and I went to law school in Texas, so I lived there for 3 years during that period of my life. And what always amazed me, and I happened to go to school in Houston, so the oil business dominated. And when I got there was the tail end of one of the downturns in the oil business. And people who were wildcatters, one of the traits that was so impressive was, well, I've been bankrupt 6 times. I'm going to do it again. I know how to do this. There were other factors that went against me, some that were external, outside of my control, exigent things that happened, et cetera, et cetera. And so they respond. And the same thing with developers, real estate developers. Houston has had at that time a number of boom and bust periods over and over again. They were pretty deep when they went down, and when they came back with a flourish. And you would meet people, and it was like a chevron on their sleeve. I survived this downturn, that turn. So I agree with you. The other thing that I think is important in our population in this area, et cetera, there are some interesting distinctive models. The Bosnian community in St. Louis, which now numbers somewhere between 60 and 80,000, it's reported, et cetera. At least from my little mother-in-law survey, very informal, there seems to be a real entrepreneurial spirit. Absolutely. One of the nice things about entrepreneurship as well is language doesn't have to be the barrier. In small businesses in particular, the willingness to put seat of the pants to the seat of the chair to do the job, and whether you own 5 dry cleaners or 6 produce markets or whatever, hard work in many cases, and being a good business person and drive, those characteristics are also important. And again, they can overcome the language situation over a period of time. The model of having entrepreneurs as parents and family, you can't discount.
Well, and there's also research showing that entrepreneurs or self-employed people are happier at their jobs. And that's why I never became an entrepreneur, because I never wanted to work for a jerk.
I get it.
You got that?
It also seems to me that there's a really special skill that entrepreneurs have of understanding what niche they can fill. That there's some sort of, it's something that economists can't necessarily put their finger on, right? It's a special gift of the entrepreneur's personality to see what the community needs, what they want, what's going to work, where it needs to be, who it's going to serve. And I've always, in my economic training, understood the role of the entrepreneur to be very unique in that regard, one of the most important pieces of human capital in a thriving economy.
Yeah, in economics, I've done research on entrepreneurship, and it's all about the policy environment or the business environment, but it's still, well, you can only do so much unless you go to the actual people and make them be entrepreneurs, or
right.
kind of
You've
get
got to have that personality. And
spirit.
our underwriter for the Duree Center, Rick Duree, is a
Right.
great example of that just driven, energetic personality, someone who's always got an idea, who's always ready to move, who's thinking creatively all the time. And it just takes a certain kind of person.
Yeah, I think Rick's a great example. He's
Yeah.
the Niagara Falls of ideas. They just keep coming over and over and over, a mile a minute. And you know, in the popular media, when this biography of Steve Jobs came out, I think that to me really gave a great sense of what it took. He took a field that was already dominated by a completely different approach when he started Apple. And his success is legendary, and the people that became his customers and his stakeholders had a completely different sense of how to do things, and it worked.
Right. Well, thank you very much for talking to us today about the Duree Center. I'm really excited about the upcoming symposium. Can you remind us of the date?
Yeah, November 16th, and our website will have the registration. We take reservations. That it's not up yet, and we'll be shortly announcing who the presenters will be in the actual program.
Wonderful. And you can find out more about that at www.lindenwood.edu/Hammond Institute. And there are links there for the Duree Center, for the Liberty and Ethics Center, and for the Center for Economics and the Environment. And we have many wonderful programs coming up this fall, so I hope you'll join us. Thank you very much.